They didn't think I'd do it. That's the part I keep coming back to. My son stood at the head of the table at my 70th birthday dinner, the one they'd organized, the one I was told was a celebration. And he raised his glass and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Dad, we think it's time you let go of the house." Not a question, a statement. With a smile, and everyone at the table nodded. My daughter, my son-in-law, my daughter-in-law, even my youngest grandchild, who didn't understand what was happening but clapped because the adults were smiling. I set down my fork. I picked up my glass of water, and I said very quietly, "Okay." They thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. My name is Gerald. I'm 72 years old now, and I spent 41 years working for the same manufacturing company outside of Columbus, Ohio. Started on the floor, retired as plant operations manager. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the kind of man I am. I don't quit. I don't complain. I show up, I do the work, and I trust that the people I love will do the same. My wife, Margaret, was the same kind of person. We met at a church potluck in 1976. She brought green bean casserole. I brought nothing because I was 24 and didn't know you were supposed to bring something. She laughed when I told her that. Said it was the most honest thing a man had said to her in years. We were married 11 months later. Margaret passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I was with her every day. I held her hand the morning she died, and I told her that everything was going to be okay, and I believed it when I said it because I had to. After she was gone, I rattled around in our house for about a year. 4 bedrooms. The yard she'd spent 30 years tending. The kitchen where she made her mother's recipe for apple butter every October. I thought about selling. I thought about it every single morning for 12 months, but I didn't, because that house was the last place I felt close to her. My son, Gregory, lived 40 minutes away in Dublin, Ohio, with his wife, Patricia. My daughter, Elaine, lived about 20 minutes in the other direction in Westerville with her husband, Mark. Both of them had children. Both of them had good jobs, good homes, good lives. Lives I'd helped build by putting them through college, co-signing loans when they were starting out, handing Gregory $15,000 when his landscaping business was struggling in 2017, and handing Elaine $10,000 when she and Mark needed a new roof the year before that. I didn't keep a ledger. That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I gave freely, and I gave willingly, and I never once asked for anything in return. But people have a way of mistaking kindness for weakness, and they have a way of mistaking patience for permission. It started small. Gregory began stopping by the house, not to visit but to inspect. He'd walk through the rooms with his hands in his pockets, pausing at the water stain on the dining room ceiling I'd been meaning to fix, running his finger along the garage door frame, asking questions like, "Have you had the HVAC serviced lately?" Not out of concern. Out of inventory. Elaine was subtler. She started sending articles. "Dad, did you see this piece about seniors and home maintenance? Dad, I read that a lot of people your age are moving to communities where they don't have to worry about all this." She'd call it downsizing. She'd call it simplifying. She never once called it what it was. What it was, they wanted the house. Margaret and I had bought it in 1988 for $94,000. In today's market, it appraised at just over $420,000. Paid off. No mortgage. Free and clear, the way we'd worked our entire lives to make it. And my children looked at that number and saw their inheritance, and they decided they were tired of waiting for it. I don't know exactly when I figured it out. It crept up on me the way most painful truths do. Slowly. Then all at once. There was an afternoon. Gregory came over and brought his financial advisor with him, without asking me, without warning. Just showed up with this young man in a suit who started talking about estate planning and liquidity, and how it might make sense to transfer assets while you're still healthy. I sat in my own living room and listened to a stranger tell me to give away my house, and Gregory sat across from me, nodding like this was all perfectly normal. I asked them both to leave. Gregory called me that evening and said I was being resistant. Patricia left a voicemail saying she hoped I wasn't going to be difficult. Elaine texted me a heart emoji, which I suppose was her version of diplomacy. I didn't respond to any of them for 3 days. I sat in Margaret's kitchen and I drank my coffee and I thought about who these people had become. And I thought about whether I had done something to make them this way. And I decided that yes, maybe I had, because I had made it very easy for them to take and very easy for me to give, and I had never once made them understand that there were limits. I was going to show them the limits. I called a man named Franklin Webb. He was an estate attorney I'd been referred to years ago, back when Margaret was first sick and we were getting our affairs in order. I'd met with him twice, filed some paperwork, and left feeling like we'd handled everything. But I hadn't spoken to him since. I called him on a Tuesday morning in October, 2 years before my 70th birthday dinner. I told him I wanted to revisit everything. I told him I had some concerns about how my estate was structured and what my children might do with it when I was gone. Franklin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Tell me what outcome you want." I told him. He said, "We can do that." Over the next 18 months, Franklin and I met 7 times. I drove 45 minutes each way to his office in Worthington, and I sat across from him and we rebuilt everything from the ground up. I won't go into every legal detail because, honestly, some of it I barely understood myself. But the shape of it was this. I established a revocable living trust. The house went into the trust. My retirement accounts, my savings, my investment portfolio, all restructured. The beneficiaries were updated. Gregory and Elaine were not removed entirely. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a vindictive man, or at least I try not to be. But the proportions changed significantly. And there were conditions. Conditions Franklin helped me draft very carefully, over several sessions, with a great deal of thought. My grandchildren, Gregory's 2 boys and Elaine's daughter, were named as primary beneficiaries of specific accounts. College funds, set up cleanly and separately so that money would go directly to their education and no one could touch it in the meantime. A portion of the estate was designated to a scholarship fund at Ohio State in Margaret's name, which she would have loved. The house itself, Margaret's house, our house, I decided to leave to a preservation trust connected to our local historical society with a provision that it be maintained as a community gathering space. Margaret volunteered there for 12 years. She knew the director personally. She would have cried when I told her in a good way. I signed the final documents in February. Franklin walked me out to the parking lot afterward and shook my hand and said, "I hope you feel settled." I said I did. And I meant it. Then I went home and I waited, because here's what I knew: Gregory and Elaine were planning something. I'd noticed the coordination between them, the texts they'd stopped sending when I walked into the room, the way Patricia had started being unusually warm to me, bringing over lasagna on weekends, which she had never done before in 20 years of being my daughter-in-law. Elaine's husband, Mark, had invited me to golf twice in 1 month. Mark doesn't like golf. I know this because he told me so at a family barbecue in 2019. They were setting something up, I just didn't know when. My 70th birthday. Of course. The milestone. The round number. The moment that sounds reasonable to say, "Dad, you're 70 now, don't you think it's time?" They'd reserved a private room at a steakhouse in Eastern Town Center. 13 people around a table. Grandchildren running between chairs. A birthday cake that Elaine had ordered from the nice bakery in Westerville. Balloons. Photographs. I dressed well that evening. I wore the sport coat Margaret had bought me for our 40th wedding anniversary. I sat at the head of the table because they put me there, and I ate my steak, and I listened to the grandchildren talk about their soccer games and their teachers, and I thought, I'm going to miss moments like this, and I also thought, this is necessary. After the cake, after the singing, after the grandchildren were handed tablets and earphones by their parents, Gregory stood up with his wine glass. He talked about what a great father I'd been. He talked about how much the family meant to him. He talked about Margaret briefly. His voice caught a little, which I believed was genuine. And then he pivoted, smoothly, the way he'd clearly rehearsed, and he said that the family had been talking, and that they all agreed that at this stage of life, I deserved to be free from burden, that the house was a lot for one person, that they had connections to a wonderful senior living community in New Albany, very nice, independent living, and that they wanted to help me transition. He said the word transition like it was a gift. Then he sat down and smiled at me. Elaine reached over and put her hand on my arm. 13 people waited for me to respond. I finished the last sip of my water. I folded my napkin. I looked at Gregory, and then I looked at Elaine, and I said, I appreciate everything you've said. I want you both to know I've already taken care of it. Gregory's smile stayed fixed for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, I've been working with an estate attorney for the past 2 years. Everything is already decided. The house, the accounts, all of it. You don't need to worry about any of it, Elaine said. Dad, we're not worried, we just... I know what you are, I said. And I said it kindly. I want to be clear about that. I was not angry at that moment. I had used up all my anger in Franklin's office and in Margaret's kitchen on those long Tuesday mornings. What I felt then was something calmer, something that had been a long time coming. I love you both. I'm going home now. I stood up. I shook hands with Mark. I hugged Elaine, who had gone stiff. I clapped Gregory on the shoulder. I kissed each grandchild on the top of the head. I thanked the restaurant staff. I drove home in the dark on 270 North, and I listened to a Merle Haggard album the whole way, and I felt, for the first time in years, completely at peace. My phone started ringing the next morning at 7:15. Gregory first, then Elaine, then Patricia, then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Mark, calling from his office phone because I hadn't picked up from his cell. I let them go to voicemail. I made my coffee. I sat in the kitchen and I read the paper, actual newsprint. I still subscribe. And I ate 2 pieces of toast with peanut butter. And I watched the birds at the feeder Margaret had hung outside the window in 2003, and that I still fill every week without fail. At 9 o'clock I called Franklin and told him to expect contact from my children. He said, already expecting it. Gregory showed up at the house at 10:30. I saw his truck in the driveway from the kitchen window. I let him knock. I opened the door on the 3rd knock. He looked like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. He started with apologies, which I hadn't expected. He said he was sorry if the dinner had felt ambushy. He used that word, ambushy. Then he moved quickly to questions about what exactly I had done with the estate planning, what the attorney had advised, whether it could be revisited. I said, come in and sit down. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured him coffee. I told him clearly and completely what I had done. I watched his face move through several different expressions. Confusion, then understanding, then something that looked like grief, though I suspected it was more about the house than about me. When I finished, he said, Dad, you didn't have to do it this way. I said, Gregory, I've been your father for 44 years. I watched you take your first steps in this kitchen. I drove you to every soccer practice from age 6 to age 14. I stayed up with you when you were sick. I gave you money when you needed it, and I never said a word about it. And you brought a financial advisor to my home without telling me. He didn't say anything. I'm not angry, I said. I want you to hear that. I'm not angry. But I also needed you to understand that I see clearly. I have always seen clearly. I just chose not to say so until I had something to say. He left an hour later. He hugged me at the door. It was the first genuine hug I'd gotten from him in a long time. I don't know what it meant exactly, but it felt like a beginning of something honest, which is more than I'd had before. Elaine came 2 days later. She cried. I expected that. Elaine has always expressed things through tears where Gregory expresses them through action. I let her cry. I gave her tissues. I did not apologize and I did not soften what I had done, but I told her that I loved her and that her children were protected, which seemed to matter to her more than she expected it to. She asked about the house. I told her about Margaret's connection to the Historical Society. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, Mom would have liked that. I know, I said. There's something I haven't told you yet, and I want to be careful about how I say it because it's the part that's complicated. The week after my birthday dinner, I got a letter, not an email, a letter, handwritten, on no paper, forwarded to me by Franklin because apparently my daughter had sent it to his office. Elaine had written to him asking, essentially, whether there was any way to contest the trust. Franklin called me to let me know. He said, as a professional matter, he needed to inform me. He also said, as a personal observation, that the letter was not well thought through legally, and that nothing would come of it. I asked him how he wanted to handle it. He said that was entirely up to me. I sat with that for a week. I didn't call Elaine. I didn't mention it. I just sat with it. The way you sometimes have to sit with a hard thing to understand what it means. And what I decided it meant was this. My children were frightened. They were frightened of losing something they had started to count on before it was theirs to count on. That's a human thing. That's not evil. It's foolish and it's hurtful. But it isn't evil. And Elaine, for all her mistakes, is not an evil person. I called her the following Sunday. I didn't bring up the letter. I asked about my granddaughter's soccer tournament. I listened to the whole story, including the bad referee and the missed goal in the second half, and I laughed in the right places, and at the end of the call I said, "I love you, Elaine." She said, "I love you too, Dad." And she sounded like she meant it. That's where things stand now. Gregory and I have had 2 dinners since my birthday, just the 2 of us, at a barbecue place in Gahanna that we've been going to since he was in high school. We talk about his business, which is doing better. We talk about his business, which is doing better. We talk about football. We don't talk about the estate, and I don't think we need to. Elaine's daughter, my granddaughter, who is 9 years old and has her grandmother's stubbornness and her grandmother's laugh, came to spend a Saturday with me last month. We raked leaves. We made grilled cheese. We watched a nature documentary about penguins that she picked out, and I pretended to find as interesting as she did. When her mother picked her up at 5 o'clock, my granddaughter hugged me for a long time at the door. She said, "See you next Saturday, Grandpa." I looked at Elaine over my granddaughter's head. Elaine was watching us. Her expression was something I hadn't seen from her in years, something quieter than usual. I said, "Every Saturday if you want. I fill the bird feeder every week. I drink my coffee in Margaret's kitchen every morning. I drive to Franklin's office once a year to review the trust and make sure everything is still correct. In the spring, I'm going to replant the flower bed along the back fence. The one Margaret kept herself. The one I've let go little these past 6 years. I'm 72. I have, if I'm lucky, another 20 years in this house. 20 more autumns. 20 more rounds of the apple butter recipe. I taught myself to make it last October, and I nearly ruined a pot. And I tried again, and it wasn't as good as Margaret's, and I'll try again this year. My children know now that I see them clearly. That I have always seen them clearly. I think that knowledge is going to change the way they see themselves over time. Maybe I'm being an optimist. Margaret always said I was a secret optimist, underneath everything. She wasn't wrong about much. I stood at the kitchen window this morning watching the birds at the feeder, and I thought about the night of my birthday dinner, and I thought about Franklin shaking my hand in the parking lot, and I thought about Gregory's face when I told him what I'd done, and I thought about my granddaughter asking to come back next Saturday, and I thought, I got it right. It took me longer than it should have, and I was too patient for too many years, but in the end, I got it right. That's enough for me. Before I go, where are you listening from today? And have these kinds of stories ever helped you through something you were going through yourself? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. I've thought a lot about what made Gregory and Elaine believe they could walk into a birthday dinner and ask me to hand over my house. And the honest answer is that I made it easy for them. Not on purpose. But I did. When you spend 40 years being the person who shows up, who gives without asking, who smooths things over and says, it's fine, when it isn't fine, people stop seeing you as someone with limits. They stop seeing you as someone who notices. And eventually, they stop seeing you at all. They see what you provide. They see the house, the accounts, the paid-off mortgage. They see an asset with a heartbeat. That's not evil. I want to be careful about that word because I don't think my children are evil people. I think they made the mistake that a lot of people make when they'd been comfortable for too long. They confused patience for weakness. They confused silence for agreement. and they started counting on something that was never theirs to count on. The cause was a long time building. Every time I handed Gregory money without a conversation, every time I let Elaine's comments about downsizing slide without pushing back, I was making a small deposit into a ledger they were keeping without me knowing. By the time they sat down to plan that birthday dinner, they had convinced themselves they were just collecting what was already owed. The effect came in Franklin's office. It came in 7 meetings over 18 months. It came in the form of a trust document with my signature on it and my granddaughter's name in it, and Margaret's name attached to a scholarship that will outlast all of us. The effect was quiet, and it was deliberate, and it was the most important thing I did in the last decade of my working life. I am not a man who believes the world automatically corrects itself. I've lived long enough to know that injustice sits very comfortably if you let it. What I do believe is that clarity, real clarity, the kind you earn by sitting alone in a kitchen for a long time and thinking hard, is its own form of power. And once you have it, nobody can take it from you at a dinner table with a wine glass and a rehearsed speech. The tricky thing about raising children is that you're always teaching them something, whether you mean to or not. For years I was teaching Gregory and Elaine that the way to get what you want from me was to wait. I was teaching them that I had no edges. I decided at 70 that it was not too late to teach them something different, something truer. I don't know if what I did was perfect. I've turned it over many times, but I know that my granddaughter comes over on Saturdays now and we rake leaves and make grilled cheese, and she asks to come back the following week. I know that Gregory and I sit across from each other at a barbecue place in Gahanna and talk like two people who are being honest with each other for the first time in a while. I know that Elaine said, "Mom would have liked that," when I told her about the Historical Society, and she was right. And saying so took something out of her that I think needed to come out. Integrity isn't a feeling. It's a practice. It's a thing you do when nobody's watching. In Franklin's office over 18 months before anyone even knows there's a decision being made. And resilience isn't about being hard. It's about being rooted enough that when someone tries to move you, you don't move. And you don't even have to raise your voice to show it. I fill the bird feeder every week. I'm learning to make Margaret's apple butter. I have 20 more autumns if I'm lucky, and I intend to use them well. That's the only inheritance that ever mattered.